to learn in honor of Roland Sassoon, who just isn't well. He had a heart attack the other day, and he's still in ICU. So please God, he should be well, and everybody else who is not well. Seems like whilst we were over the difficulties in a way of, at least in this wave of Corona, we're still being stuck with other people, and there's been quite a few deaths in the past few days. So please God, we should just know only simchas and besorot tovot. To learn in what I want to look at is there's a strange narrative. We understand that Yitzchak has this whole story with the water and the wells, and there's Beersheba and there's Rehovot and all these places. But then the Torah has two psukim that are quite kind of hidden in everything, and in it we're going to maybe find some really important ideas. It says here that the Torah tells us that when Esav was 40 years old, when Esav was, the way the Torah puts it is that when Esav was 40 years old, Vayehi Esav ben Arba'im Shana, when Esav was 40 years old, what did he do? He when Esav was 40 years old, he took two wives. He took a wife. He realized at 40 that it could be that things were a little bit wrong in his life. He takes the first one is Yehudit bat Be'eri. By the way, it's the first time we find the name Yehudit, which precedes Yehuda. Interestingly enough. That's an important thing to bear in mind, that the concept of gratitude, of expressing the gratitude for a child, came before Leah had Yehuda, and that's where Yehudit comes from. So, because we have to understand that the word Yehudit does not mean Jewess. We translate it as Jewess, but the word Yehudit is coming from the word Hoda'ah, from gratitude. Important, just by the way, is that our description as Jews, as Yehudim, we first find, anybody know, in the Megillah. The Megillah describes Mordechai as a Mordechai Yehudi, and there Rashi says that it was the name that was given to the Jews who came from the tribe of Yehuda, the majority of whom came from the tribe of Yehuda when they were exiled. So it's in its essence, according to many, it's just quite a disparaging name for us to be called Yehudim. We are really Bnei Yisrael. We're not Yehudim. We're Bnei Yisrael. Just something to bear in mind. Okay, so Esav is 40 years old. He takes these two men, both of whom come from the Hittites, from the Chittim. Both of the Chittim are nations, are part of the seven nations that live in Canaan. And if that's the case, then surely that's not the appropriate people for a man of Esav to take as wives. Why? Because he comes from Yitzchak, and we'll have to look at that and understand that. And it says, "Vatiena morat ruach the Yitzchak Rivka," and they became morat ruach, a source of like morat ruach is a bitter spirit for Yitzchak and Rivka. Let's understand what's going on. So Rashi tells us, Ben Arba'im Shana, Esav hayanim shal chazir. Rashi doesn't waste any time. He dives straight into it, and he says Esav is like a chazer. A chazer, which we translate as a pig, is really a wild boar in a Torah context. Chazir miyar. Chazir hazeh kishu shochev, says this chazir, when it lies down, poshet tlafav, it stretches out its front arms. Lomar ra'u shani ta'or, look, I'm pure. I've got cloven hooves. And so too, Esav's, people like Esav, show themselves that they steal and do all these things, but they show themselves as ksherim. That for 40 years, Esav was busy tzad nashim. Remember, it says that Esav was an ish Yodea, tzayid ish sadeh. He was a hunter. He was a man of the field. That's how we normally translate that. There's nothing really wrong with that. He was a hunter. But his cunning and his guile, says Rashi, also enabled him to seduce women away from their husbands. When he became 40, Amar, he said, oh, Abba ben Mem Shana Nasa Isha. He says, oh, my father married at 40. You know what? So I'm also going to marry at 40. I'm following in the Messiah of my father. Now, this is Esav, who's following the Messiah of his father. And it seems to be we understand that, that's the only thing that he follows in the Messiah of his father, because everything else, his father's as great as tzaddik, he's a tower, he's a kadosh, he's and everything. Esav says, well, this is the thing I'm going to do. And why does he do that? Because it's an external action. It's something that his father will say, oh, he's just like me. Somehow he's able to pull the wool over his father's eyes. The Sforno points out, and it's not clear what his tone is. The Sforno says that Esav was 40 years, that Yitzchak at this point in time had not bothered to marry him off. Ula achiv, nor to his brother. Nashim agunot, appropriate women. Now it's fascinating that the Torah only records Esav as being 40 years old. It should have said, Vayi Esav v'Yaakov ben 40 shana. Vayikach Esav Ishai to it. It should have said that both of them were 40 years old. We know they're twins. Why is it only about Esav? Because this is all about Esav. For Yaakov is waiting. Yaakov is waiting for the appropriate moment, for the appropriate time, for the appropriate woman. He's and it's interesting that he's waiting. He's learning Torah. He's doing all these things. He's on a high spiritual level. He is in such a different planet. So therefore, for him, it's not a big issue right now. We find that in other places, the Gemara tells of the great Tanaim who didn't want to get married because they were so busy, they were so engrossed in their learning, they didn't want that as part of their lives, they didn't feel they needed it as part of their lives, even if they had to mevatel the mitzvah of periyavaribia of having children. Vayikach isha et Yehudit bat be'erach iti. So Esav is 40 years old. His father never bothered, says the Sforno, to organize a proper and appropriate wife for him or for his brother. So Esav goes and he takes this woman, and he makes an important statement that Yitzchak wasn't makpid on this, which is strange. Strange that Yitzchak is not makpid on this. That we see that Yitzchak never ever mentions that he never warns Esav not to marry the inappropriate woman, as he does later on to Yaakov. So the Netziv says, "Mevuar ki yada Yitzchak asher b'masher amar Hashem laAvram ki Yitzchak yikarei lacha zera." He says because Yitzchak knew that when Avram Avinu gave him a bracha from Hashem, that Hashem had told Avram that through Yitzchak the seed will continue. It says Yitzchak yikarei lacha zara, that in Yitzchak will be called your seed. It says Yitzchak v'lo kol Yitzchak. In Yitzchak, not all of Yitzchak, but only part of Yitzchak. Hamayuchad, the one who's special, and who is that? Yaakov. Yoshev Alim. It must be Yaakov, because Yaakov is clearly the one like Yitzchak. Not only from the point of view of the values, because Yitzchak seems to believe that Esav has the similar values, but what he really is a Yoshev Alim. He's not a person outside. He's not a person who's going out and engaging and doing all these things like Esav does. Yitzchak is a much more of a homebody. He's a Yoshev Alim. He sits in the tent. Who Yakarei Zera, Avram. He knew that Yaakov was going to be that person. Who ultimately is going to become the father of this multitude of nations. It will be the Merkava L'Shchina. It will be the one upon which the Shchina will ride. And he'll also be the one who carries the Hashgacha Pratis of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like Avram Avinu was. So if that's the case, says the Netziv Ela, Shemikol Makom, nonetheless, Ahav Yitzchak et Esav atzmo, b'chashvo ki alichos olam lo b'hesker v'ish toivu. Says he still, even though he knew for certain, says the Netziv, that Yitzchak knew for sure that Yaakov was going to be the next person in line, he still loved his other son Esav, because he believed him whilst he was in the field, he was part of the world. He believed him to be an Ishtov. Right? He knew he knew he wasn't going to be the one who's going to be from where the chosen people come. However, he still loved him. And so therefore it didn't bother him that much. The Sforah doesn't seem to say that. The Sforah seems to want to say that Yitzchak should have been more careful. But the Netziv says didn't bother Yitzchak because he knew that Esav was just going to be just another person in the world. However, the Torah tells us that that these women were deep irritations to the to Yitzchak and to Rivka. The Torah says to Yitzchak ula Rivka, and therefore it's very specific that each one of them had different issues with with these women. So if you look at Rashi says, what is this Morat Ruach? Lashon Morat Ruach. It was just they just upset them, they angered them. Why was that? Yitzchak Rivka shayu ovdas avodah zarah, because they served avodah zarah. The Netziv says that we need to understand each one of them had an issue with these women in their own right. Says, you know why? Because the reality is that Yitzchak and Rivka both responded to Esav and to his wives in different ways. Their relationships were completely different. Because we know Yitzchak loved Esav. But Rivka, not the same Rivka. Rivka did not love Esav. That's what the Netziv says at all. Says sometimes love, deep love, it's such a deep insight of the Netziv. Love causes this pain. Because he knew that Yitzchak knew that these women would be bad, and so there was anger, there was upsetness that was coming because of his ava. He says, he says, you know, that hatred also causes this kind of upset, this deep upset. You know why? Because they despised Rivka, because Rivka despised them. And so because she was not involved with them, so therefore they weren't involved with her. And so therefore you have this terrible relationship of Esav, who is 40 years old, who is married to these women, who Yitzchak has a certain level of relationship, but he feels hurt by that because they're not adhering to any type of his values. And perhaps it could be said that it is at this point that Yitzchak begins to see the real Esav, which he had never seen before, that he's married these women and he gets involved in those kind of things, whereas Rivka feels that she is being wronged by them all the time because they don't see her and they don't recognize her chashivut, her importance, in a similar way to Hagar, who didn't see the chashivut, who stopped seeing the chashivut of Sarah in those times. And it's at this point in time where Esav is now settled down that perhaps the Torah has to tell us this, because it perhaps is going to set the scene for that one little point in time in the brachas that Yitzchak is going to give to Yaakov instead of giving to Esav, where we do not see this terrible response from Yitzchak, or how terrible it was that he did what he did, that he gave Yaakov the bracha, because it could be that in a way, and we'll have to look at this, please God, tomorrow, that perhaps Yitzchak understood that he gave the bracha to the right person, because he recognized now who the real Esav was. He still loved him. He knew he wanted that Yaakov, he recognized Akol called Yaakov, Esav. We always recognize a person by their voice, not by what they look like. It seems to be that perhaps he knew that it really was Yaakov, but he recognized that he was the right one to get the bracha ultimately. And now was the time for that. We'll discuss that, please God, tomorrow. Have a beautiful day, everybody. God bless.
Thank you.